Thank you, Jennifer, for your very honest talk. I always appreciate it when people are very honest about their practice, because it helps everybody else, because then people don't beat themselves up and they say, oh, I can still practice because there's this other person and she's still practicing. So thank you. And Jennifer talked about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and how the Buddha seems the highest, and then comes the teachings, which are important, and then comes the Sangha. But the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha are not separate. The Sangha is the Buddha. The Sangha presents the teachings. This glass of water presents the teachings. Everything in this universe is already teaching us. And we are not separate from Buddha. So thank you very much for your talk. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Thank you. And then Jane will come next. Okay.
Okay, so in the interview yesterday morning, you made a comment that thoughts are not your mind, and but your mind perceives your thoughts. I get that right? Okay. Could you mention a little bit more about that?
I'm happy to. Okay. So first of all, in the Abhidharma, you have 6 sense organs, not 5. There's the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, which means like the skin, and then the mind. And there are other senses too, like proprioception, for example, which don't appear in that. But the mind is conceived of as a sense organ. And what does the mind sense? The mind senses thoughts. So the eye perceives color. Even if it's just black and white, then the eye is perceiving shades of gray, white, black. So the eye perceives color. It doesn't really perceive shape. The brain creates the shape. The mind perceives the color. And the eye perceives the color. The ears perceive sound. They don't perceive words, they don't perceive music, they perceive sound. The brain makes it into words or music. The nose perceives smells. And again, the brain is what says, oh, that's garlic, oh, that's a rose. The brain does that. The nose simply perceives smells. The mouth perceives taste. The body perceives pressure, hot, cold. And the mind perceives thoughts. So that's the classical Abhidharma. And of course, the Heart Sutra says no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, because it's hitting the Abhidharma. But the fact is, that's the sort of Buddhist construct of the senses. And what the mind does is it perceives thoughts. And I have started to think of the mind this is not my idea. The mind is vast. The mind is not it's not limited to us. This mind is very vast. It's this universal mind, this huge mind. It's very vast. And as we practice, we learn more and more to rest in it. And then I started to think, this metaphor actually occurred to me this morning while I was sitting. Bad Judy, she's thinking while she's sitting. This metaphor appeared to me that this mind is like a vast field. It's this vast field, and the thoughts come and they set up little huts and they set up little tents, and sometimes they set up like maybe a 3-story building, and sometimes they set up a giant mansion with swimming pools and tennis courts, and sometimes they set up a huge skyscraper with 100 floors in it. And those are really hard to knock down, right? So it's like this field gets taken over by these buildings, but these buildings are actually insubstantial. They're not really there, So we let our mind be taken over by this thinking. This thinking just takes us over and it grabs onto us. And many of you know my teacher used to say, "You tell your backseat driver, shut up!" You know, in his wonderful Korean accent. Yeah, so that's, backseat driver, or you could think of it as a bunch of squatters on land that that is supposed to be a great, beautiful national park. And instead you have these squatters, sitting on this land and building all these structures on it. So we don't have to let that happen. Yeah, thinking is a tool. Thinking is a very valuable tool. You when you see construction sites, and a lot of times you see, the people standing around, you say, why aren't they working? Well, because they need to think for a minute. They need to figure out what the next step is. So thinking is a wonderful tool, but then we just let it take over. We let it, put these foundations that are like, 10 stories deep with garages or whatever, right? So we don't have to do that. We can use this tool and then put this tool down when it's not needed. So that's what I meant. Okay? Your thoughts do not define you. I'll tell you another story about that. When a long time ago, I did a solo retreat in Massachusetts. Gosh, this was like 30 years ago or something. It was a really long time ago. And maybe 35. Anyway, I did this solo retreat in Massachusetts, and I think this was either before cell phones, or cell phones didn't work very well or something, but I had no way to track the days. And it was a 3-week retreat. I needed to track the days because I needed to leave, at the end of the retreat. So I thought, okay, I'll keep a little diary. And the first few days I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. Every rest period I'd write all about my thinking and my feelings, and I'd write. And then around the third day I thought, wait a minute, I'm just reifying my thinking. I'm just making something real that isn't real, that something should just pass through, and I'm holding on to it and solidifying it. So after that, a retreat would be something like, saw red newt on path, the end. Just something to remind me of the day, the date, and then something that I saw. That's it. And I put down not just the date, but something I saw, so that I remember, oh, that's the day. Because, when you sit along, you kind of forget, like, what time it is, what day it is. I mean, you just forget. So if I didn't put down some kind of thing, I'd look at the date and I say, was that today or was that yesterday? I know it wasn't tomorrow, but did I already record it, right? So I had to do something so that I had a particular image to remind myself of what it was. And that was it. So then after the retreat, I go to meet my brother, because he and his wife live close by, and the idea was I would drive over there and take a shower, thank God, because there were no showers there, and sort of relax, go out to dinner, visit with them since they live far away, and have a little fun. So I go to meet him, and we go out for pizza and beer, and he asked me what it was like. So I told him about the diary, how I started writing a diary. And every single day, I would write all these long things. And around day 3, I realized this is crazy. Stop it. This is not correct. And he looked at me and he said, well, if you're not your thoughts, who are you? And I said, well, I'm not my thoughts, and neither are you. You're not your thoughts either. My brother is actually terrific. He has this sort of spiritual insight, but he's one of these sort of autodidacts. He does his own meditation style and stuff, but he's always come out with this wonderful thing. But at that point, he came up with this thing that wasn't maybe so wonderful. But it was very interesting. Like, who are we if we're not our thoughts? We think that's who we are, but that's not who we are. So thank you. And James, you had a question.
Yeah, mine's less of a question and just more if you could say a few words. But I'm getting married on Wednesday.
Oh, mazel tov.
So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like Buddhism and marriage and the kind of relationship there.
Stan, can I talk about marriage? I'm not going to talk about Buddhism and marriage, but I will talk about stands in my marriage vows because I think that's interesting. So usually marriage vows are, I promise you, like you'll say, I, James, and then you'll say something about what you promise, how to love and, and take care of your wife. And then she'll say something about how she's going to love and take care of you and stuff like that. But stands in my marriage vows in the quantum school of Zen, you don't do like facing each other's marriage vows, you face the world. So instead of facing each other, you face the world and you vow together how you're going to live your life. And that attitude, I think, is really wonderful. You're vowing something together. And that doesn't mean your marriage will not have problems, and that doesn't mean your marriage won't maybe even fade. You have plenty of divorces in the quantum school of Zen. But this notion of you're facing the world together, that's the first thing I'll say. And the second thing I'll say about marriage, and to be really honest, this is what has kept our marriage alive all these years, is when one of us causes the other one to suffer, the one who caused the suffering forgets about their own problems and looks at the person who's suffering because of their actions. And that's not saying that neither of us has been perfect, because we've both been far from perfect, Everyone in their life is far from perfect in any relationship. I mean, any parent can tell you. I'm always wanting to apologize to my son. I'm so sorry I did this. I'm so sorry I did that. I thought I was doing the right thing, And if our parents are honest, they would want to apologize to us too, But to put down your own suffering because this other person is suffering, that's extremely important. In fact, in any relationship, but especially in a marriage. So the two things of facing the world together, and when you see that your partner is suffering, then your own suffering somehow becomes less important to you. That's the two things. And I don't know if it comes from Buddhism. I don't know where it comes from. But Stan and I were married in 1978, and we're still here. So, thank you. And have a wonderful wedding. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
I have a question, Judy.
Sure.
So I'm perpetually interested in this in mind. I was trying to think how to put it, and I liked your epiphany of that analogy. That it's like, wow, that really makes sense. But so do we each have our own brain up here, but is mind just universal? Do we each have a mind, or is it just universal?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it because I don't, it depends on how you're using mind. Mind is a very vague word. It's a very, very, it's not very tightly defined. Watch is very tightly defined, but mind is not so tightly defined. So I think that's really the best that I can say. I mean, there's in some sense, one could say, and I often feel this, that everything in this universe is sentient, and that these are not separate sentiences, that there is this kind of universal mind. This is a very common notion in a lot of spiritual traditions, of this universal mind. And there are some very specific notions of this, in the various levels of consciousness in Buddhism that are often referred to. This sort of universal mind is there, but it isn't even universal enough in some sense. So there are these notions, and then there's the notion of the individual mind. But if you look at it, when you even say individual, it's like we're all affected by everything, and everything is affecting us. So where are the boundaries? Where does Jennifer end? Where does Judy begin? So in some sense, you have to observe boundaries. They're very important. You have to respect each other, and et cetera, et cetera. But in some sense, where are the boundaries? We're not like little marble balls being rolled around, every now and then bumping into each other. And then that's not how it works. There's this interconnectedness. There's this very deep relationship that we all have. Everything in this universe affects everything else in this universe. The vision of Indra's net. So your question rather, in some sense, it doesn't really have an answer. It's just, how do you look at things? Okay, Charlie.
I'm going to interject a word into this conversation because it's real interesting. A universal mind indicates something that often becomes very, very confusing, and it's the word spirit. And it's the spirit of what we do in a universal sense that I can relate to. I can't relate to a spirit, like I've got a spirit. It's a thing. I don't see it as a thing. Can you comment on that? Or is there a relevance of that to this conversation?
I don't know. Spirit is another word. Soul is another word. These are words that have like 30 meanings in the dictionary, or should, right? So all these things, we're just, you're just starting to talk about definitions and stuff. It's not helpful. The image that I find helpful is you have, 5 fingers on your hand, but they each think they're separate, right? There they are. They look in the mirror, they think they're separate, but no, they're not. So that's how I see it.
Only when you can't use one of them.
But it's still connected. I didn't say they were useful. I didn't say they worked, but they're still connected. Okay? Yeah. And anyway, that's a metaphor, but I think it's a useful metaphor. Yeah, there's this tendency to try to define things like mind, like spirit, enlightenment. People try to define enlightenment. There are all these things that we try to define. And why? Why do that? Language is very porous, and it needs to be porous. So, okay. It's time for one short question, if anyone has one. Okay, time for announcements. Yeah, okay.